Okay, ladies and gentlemen, sorry to keep you all waiting. I'm assuming that you have on your screen now what says, can you all see it says the year 5778? Underneath in Hebrew letters, Tafshin Ayin Ches. Can you all see that? Yes, okay, good. Okay, so we're going to talk about, today we're going to talk about the upcoming year and what it possibly holds in store for us, what some of the messages are, and how we should approach things. It looks like it's going to be a very interesting year. It started off pretty interesting already, even though the new year didn't happen yet, but this is the month of preparation for the new year. But first of all, before we even get into that, let me introduce a concept that is vital to understand in terms of what happens in at the time of any new year. One's experience of New Year in New York City, Times Square, is not indicative in any way of what happens on the Jewish New Year, as I'm sure all of you know. For most people, Jewish New Year is quite a somber time, and even though it's a time for optimism, and it's a time for, as we'll explain, and it's a time for great joy, nevertheless, there is a sort of a serious, let's not say somber, but there is a serious side to it as well. In other words, it's time to be serious, it's not just a time for partying. And what's serious about it is that what happens on the day of the Jewish New Year, which is called Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year, what happens on Rosh Hashanah is that the life force for the entire year, a new life force that was never before in existence, was never before in creation, a new permutation, a new life force, in fact, one transcending all the other ones, otherwise it wouldn't be new. It was contained in some previous incarnation. It wouldn't be new. This is a completely new permutation, a new life force, a new elicitation of Or Ein Sof, of the infinite light, into existence on the day of the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah. Through prayers and through the proper procedures and so on and so forth, we draw that forth into the entire year, into every month. And hopefully, by so doing, we actually bring the manifestation of this new divine light to bear upon the world in which we live and make it a better place, a holier place, a place with more divine light, a place with greater kindness, a place with greater honesty, and so on and so forth, all the good things. So that's the first point. The first point is that there is a new light that comes into creation on this day. What the permutations of this light are to be, well, there are many ways of describing it and depicting it and trying to understand it. One of the ways, the way that I have chosen for the purposes of this class is to highlight how the letters of the Jewish New Year, as you can see the letters over here, let me get my spotlight here. Here we go. Yeah, the letters here, these are the letters of the Jewish year. All these letters are no, I didn't want that to happen. Okay. All these letters, I'm trying to get rid of this garbage can business here. Okay, whatever. It's doing this. Oh, there we go. Okay. So the letters of the year in Hebrew are of the year that's coming up is 5778. In other words, it's 5,778 years since creation. Right? That will be on coming up in a couple of weeks. It will be another 2 weeks actually, will be the year 5778, which in Hebrew letters is Taf Shin Ayin Chet. Just to explain, this number over here actually equals 778, but the millennium, the fifth millennium, or the sixth millennium rather, the sixth millennium, which is 5,000 years, we're in the sixth millennium now. So the hey, I didn't write in over here. It should really have been written in, but I didn't write it in. Truth is, I could probably just draw it in now. Let me just, for the sake of helping you to understand what it is, this is the letter hey, right? The letter hey. As I'm drawing with a mouse, it's not perfect, but anyway, that's hey, 5,000. And then Taf is 400, Shin is 300, that's 700. Ayin is 70, and Ches is 8. So it's 5778. That's the year that we're going into. Now, the letters of 5778 are found, in fact, in a very important verse. As you know, that is the method that I like to use, is to explain how these letters are found in a verse. Let me just erase this over here. 1 second. Let me just erase this here so we can see clearly what's going on. Okay. Now, spotlight. Okay. Here's the year, as you see again, Hey Tafshin Ayin Ches. And we have a verse from the Song of Songs, which in itself is a very significant thing. What is the Song of Songs? Well, one explanation of the Song of Songs is it is the song that all other songs sing. In other words, it's the underlying song of all of rejoicing and singing. It's the song that the songs themselves sing. That's why it's called the Song of Songs. The Song of Songs was composed by King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech. And King Solomon, when he composed the Song of Songs, composed it as a poem, essentially, a song, which is actually a dialogue. It's a dialogue between the Almighty and humanity. The soul, if we want to get more technical, it's a dialogue between God and the soul. Now, what does this song, in fact, state? So if we have a look at this verse, this is chapter 8, verse 5 of the Song of Songs. You'll see a translation down below. All right, so it says like this: Mi zot ola min hamidbar. Who is it that is coming up from the desert? In the feminine form, mi zot. Who is it that is coming up from the desert? Generally, with some exceptions, when the feminine form is used in Shir HaShirim, that refers to the soul. When the masculine form is used, that refers to the Almighty, to God. So the masculine form is generally God, and the feminine form is generally the soul. There is an exception, according to some commentaries. In this very verse, there is an exception, and I'll show it to you shortly. So, an exception in the genders of the verse. There's no in-between gender. It's either male or female. Okay, in case someone wanted to know. So, Mi zot ola min hamidbar. Who is this that is coming out of the desert? All right, this is talking about, essentially, historically, is talking about the Jewish people after their, after emerging from slavery in Egypt, after being freed as slaves in Egypt, or they weren't willingly freed, but the Egyptians were forced to free them by the 10 plagues and so on. If anyone knows history, Jewish history, the biblical history, so you probably know what that's all about. And they traversed through the desert to come to the land of Israel. They went across the desert, the Sinai desert, where we received the Torah. And then we went into the land of Israel. Okay, so Mizot Olam min Midbar, who's coming up out of the desert? Mitrapeket al Doda, cleaving to her beloved. Cleaving to her beloved. Cleaving to her beloved. Who's the beloved? Her beloved is the beloved of the soul is God, or the beloved of the Israelites in the who were coming out of Egypt. Their beloved was the Almighty God. Okay. Now, Tachat hatapuach orarticha, underneath the apple tree, I aroused you. Here is where we have a, I wouldn't say a disagreement, but two different interpretations. Who's this talking about? Is it God talking to the Jewish people underneath the apple tree, I aroused you? Or is it the Jewish people, and by extension the soul, talking to God? Is it God talking to the soul? Is it the soul talking to God? It's interpreted in both ways. And I'll explain that shortly. But, Tachta tapuach or aticha, underneath the apple tree, I aroused you. The historical significance of this is that the women whose husbands were absolutely exhausted after a day of slave labor, had no desire at all to do anything other than go to sleep. They were so exhausted. But the women aroused them under the apple trees in the fields as they were coming around, as they were coming back from their back-breaking labor. Underneath the apple trees, I aroused you. The women aroused their husbands so that they would be able to have children. They would continue the generations. That would have children continue the generations. Obviously, this is not meant only in a historical sense. This is meant also in a spiritual sense. Underneath the apple tree, and I'll explain what that is shortly, I aroused you. Whether it's the soul that arouses God or God that arouses the soul, I'm going to talk about shortly. Shama chiblatcha imecha. Over there, your mother bore you. The word chiblatcha means to bear, to give birth. Shama chibla yeladatacha. There, she endured your birth. Chibla yeladatcha. Right, she endured your birth, giving birth to you. Okay, now the letters over here that you see highlighted in red, the letters highlighted in red spell the yer. That's the same letters. Here is the hey. Here is the taf, the shin, ayin, and chet. Not necessarily in the order, but nevertheless, they are all found in the verse, which is quite unusual to find. All of these 5 consecutive words spelling out the year. Usually, you have to leave out the hey, the 6th millennium, which is shown as the hey. Right, the letter hey is actually 5, but we're in the 6th millennium, which is 5,000 years until 6,000 years. Okay, so these words here, tachat hatapuach orarticha, are the main letters that we're going to concentrate over here. Shama chiblatcha imecha, over there, your mother bore you. We'll also talk about shortly. Okay, so. Now that we have this verse, let us discuss what is the meaning of the verse over here. I will get back to that in a minute. Just let me describe and explain what is going on over here for now. Some of the commentaries explain that this idea of underneath the apple tree I aroused you, whether it's talking about the soul arousing God or God arousing the soul, it's in fact, some of the commentaries explain that it's really both ideas. What is the idea of being aroused in one way or another? Being aroused, and we're not talking necessarily about here, when we're talking about in the spiritual sense, we're not talking about sexual arousal. We are talking about arousing a person from slumber, essentially, arousing them from a state of inertia, of spiritual inertia. So when the soul is aroused from a state of spiritual inertia, how does that happen? Well, one way in which it can happen is that it is aroused by a divine incident, something that takes place, a miraculous event that takes place. When that miraculous event takes place and it arouses the soul, so there's a very strong connection then of the soul to the Almighty who brought about that miraculous event, a connection of the soul to God who brought about that miraculous event. That's why it is called underneath the apple tree. All right, whatever. Okay, underneath. It's called underneath the apple tree. What's the apple tree? The difference between an apple tree and all other trees. Now, I'm not a farmer, so I've never really checked this, but the sages in the Talmud and in the Midrash explain that there's a difference between an apple tree and every other tree. Why? Because all other trees first put out their leaves and then they put out their fruits. An apple tree does not do that. An apple tree first puts out its fruits and then the leaves. Now, when it puts out its fruits, the fruits aren't, complete ripened fruits yet before the leaves start to grow, but the little buds from which the apple tree grows precede the leaves that come to later protect the apples and the apple from too much sun and so on and so forth. So the sages see this as extremely significant. Why? What's the significance? The significance is that the protections that we have around ourselves, sometimes, in most cases, in the vast majority of cases, we need the protections before we are willing to produce any fruits, before we're willing to bring any sustenance out of ourselves, right? Before we're willing to develop ourselves into fruitful people. We need our protections. We need our comforts. We need our certainty that things are going to be going in the right direction. However, the apple tree has this nature that first it produces its fruits and then it worries about protecting them later on. I hear my fire alarm is beeping in the background. Needs a new battery. Can anyone hear that? Okay, so that's what it is. In case you can hear this, it's not a bird that I have captured in the fridge or something. Okay, so underneath the apple tree, I aroused you. Therefore, is indicative of the fact that we were aroused to action immediately, to bring forth the fruits right away without having to wait for the various conditions under which they could grow, ideally, to happen. That is the idea from that point of view. The other way of looking at it is that it was not God making events which caused the soul to grow and to bring forth its fruits, but rather that the soul, in seeking out God, immediately produced fruits, which in this case are generally thoughts and actions. It's explained in Kabbalistic and Hasidic texts that the soul has three garments, so to speak, garments. In other words, three mediums through which the soul acts. These are called thought, speech, and deed. Thought, speech, and action. Yeah, so the fruits of the soul are expressed in thought, speech, and action, whereas the leaves, in other words, the various protections and the various conditions that protect what it is that you've done, what it is that you've achieved, that protect the fruits, that only comes out later. In other words, what do we do immediately after we came out of Egypt? We were immediately willing to receive the teachings without even knowing what they said. As the Zohar points out, the Zohar being the primary Kabbalistic text on which most other Kabbalistic texts are based. So the Zohar explains that we were willing to receive the divine teachings without even knowing what they were, and that is the meaning of this verse over here, Tachat hatapuach oraticha. We said to God, we want your knowledge, we want the divine teachings which you can give us, how to live properly in the world, etc., even if we don't know what they say. That's the idea of underneath the apple tree, I aroused you. I, in this case, being the soul arousing God rather than the other way around. God arouses the soul through miraculous events. The soul arouses God through accepting upon itself the dictates of heaven, or if you want to call it the yoke of heaven. And that is when the mother in this case, is a reference to the great sages and the great saints who sort of gave birth to the people and gave them direction in how to use the divine teachings. Those are called the mother of the people, or the mother of the soul. Those that direct the soul to its fruition. There, your mother bore you. Shama chiblatcha imecha. There, your mother bore you. Is the idea that these very saintly people, the tzaddikim, they bore you, they bore the soul, they gave birth to the soul by giving it the proper direction. Okay, so that's the basic meaning of the verse. Now, what does this mean in terms of the year that is coming, this up and coming year? Well, it seems to be that there will be two tracks of arousal over here. On the one hand, there is the track of arousal that huge miracles will be seen, amazing events, and that will automatically cause the soul to want to cleave to its beloved, to God. Some of those events we see unfolding now. Even such a thing as a hurricane, which everyone should be well and be safe, has the ability to arouse within us the fear of heaven, and I'm sure after it passes, the love of heaven, the love of God, because everything hopefully is going to pass without damage to anybody, God willing. So on the one hand, there are events which are likely to happen this year, which will cause a tremendous arousal amongst people to return to seeking out God. Yeah. Okay. I was just looking at the chat for a second. That on the one hand will be probably one of the events that happens during this coming year. Another event that that will happen this year is what's I think happening now is that a lot of people are praying. Right there, your mother gave birth to you, and that was gave birth to the soul to feel that there is divine protection. There is a relationship that encompasses us and has the ability to not only protect us, but that we can be much more fruitful when we have that kind of relationship. In other words, we can give birth to a lot more things when we have that relationship with the Almighty, with the Divine. When we have a relationship with God, it's much easier to bring forth all of our abilities and to manifest them in the world and to use them for the right things, use them in the right way. And that I think will also happen. We see now that with this hurricane that's coming on, a lot of people are praying that generally didn't. There was a joke when I was there was a certain period in time in which I was living in Israel when Saddam Hussein from Iraq was shooting these Scud missiles into Israel, and he would particularly shoot them over the weekend. He had some proclivity for some reason to want to shoot them at that particular time. I don't know why it was, but whatever. There was, I don't know. In any event, as you probably know, Orthodox Jews do not listen to the radio on the Sabbath. But because instructions were given by the army and by the various forces that we had to hear, when the all clear was given, or you should go to your shelters now, and so on and so forth. So there was a standard joke going on in Israel at the time that the non-religious have started praying, because everyone was praying that the Scud wouldn't land in their in their backyard or whatever, right? Everyone was praying that would happen. I mean, these were missiles that had a lot of power to them, and actually nobody was killed except one person had a heart attack from the fear more than anything else. That was the only person that died during that time. I mean, it was also a natural death, but there were no casualties from the bombs themselves, which is absolutely amazing. In fact, I remember an amazing event when I was there. There happened to be a huge container, like one of these enormous containers that supplied gas. One of the containers, I think there were 8 of them, that supplied gas to the city of Tel Aviv. When I say gas, I mean propane, like propane gas. That kind of gas, cooking gas, they use that a lot in Israel. They use gas for heating and various other things, cooking. Anyway, there was a storage facility that had, there were 8 gas tanks. But when I say tanks, I mean enormous tanks. You're talking about things that are maybe 5 or 6 stories high. And, and a couple 100 feet across. I mean, huge things, huge. And there were various places in Tel Aviv. But so happened that one of them sprang a leak a few days earlier, and they had to empty it. Yeah, they had to transfer all the gas to another storage facility. And that was the tank that was actually hit by a Scud. Had that thing exploded, there would have been huge fires all around for miles around that area. It was a huge miracle that happened. Unbelievable. Anyway, there were many such things. But in any event, one of the standard jokes was that the non-religious people living in Israel were all praying, and the religious were all listening to the radios on the Sabbath. Right? That was standard joke, because that's what happened. But there was a tremendous arousal at that time. I remember it clearly. There was a tremendous arousal. People's hearts sort of opened up. And you can see that happening now with some of the disasters that have been around. People's hearts really open up, at least some people's. You see the humanity and the kindness and the openness and the willingness to have faith and believe in divine providence and all these other things. And that's what happens at this time. So these two things, I think, are going to be coming up in this year, and we've already had a taste of them. So Dennis is asking a question. So in Jewish thought practice, is a new year a renewal, a transition, or transformation in one's life? It could be any one of those three, and hopefully all three of them. It's a renewal in the sense that we're coming into a new year. There's new light in the world. There's therefore a new approach to everything, right? It's the month of transition is a month before the Jewish New Year. This is the month that we're in now, called the month of Elul. That's a month of transition. And the prayers and the day of this, actually a 2-day, the Jewish New Year is 2 days, not 1 day. The 2 days of the Jewish New Year are days of transformation, right? They're days in which we try and transform ourselves into something that we weren't, but that we ought ideally to be, right? That we weren't there yet, but we're trying to become that. That's what the New Year gives us the power to be able to do. So, a very good question, and I hope that answers it. Okay, so that's another idea that is coming up. Interestingly enough, the gematria, the numerical value of 5778, is also the gematria, the numerical value. Oh, I have to share screen 1 second. Is the numerical value of spotlight? Yeah, is the numerical value of the words pakod pakadati etchem. There's a verse. Pakod pakadati, the numerical value is the same as the numerical 778. Not 5778, but 778. Again, we leave out the millennium very often. The 778 is the numerical value of pakod pakadati. And what does that mean? So, God tells Moses, go and gather together the sages of Israel, and tell them the following: Hashem Elokei avotechem, God, the God of your fathers, Nira Elai, has appeared to me. Elokei Abraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Lemor, and he said as follows: Pakod pakadati etchem. I will take you out of the land of Egypt. I know, I remember, I'm aware of. Pakod pakadati means I'm aware of what's been happening to you in your slavery in Egypt. Pakod pakadati. I'm paying attention to it. Pakod pakadati etchem ve'et ha'asur lachem b'Mitzrayim, and everything that's been going on with you in Egypt. I'm aware of it, says God. In other words, I'm aware of what's going on with the individual. We heard and we're understood, and we can rely on the fact that things will be happening in a positive sense. Positive things will be happening. So that's the word. That's another hint as to what's coming in this year, the idea of divine providence and oversight of everything, that he knows what's going on, and things are going to be moving hopefully in the right direction. In addition to that, it is also the gematria, also the numerical value of the words ha'olamot ha'elyonim, the higher worlds. What are the higher worlds? The higher worlds are the objects of a higher consciousness. As everybody knows, in Kabbalah, there are 5 worlds. 4 mostly are spoken about. The 5th one is very esoteric. It's also spoken about a lot, but it's very, very esoteric. And it's called the world of Adam Kadmon. But the Olamot HaElyonim are Adam Kadmon and Atzilut, and even possibly Bria, the world of Bria, the world of Adam Kadmon, the primordial world, in other words, the meta world, the world above and containing all the other worlds. Then there's the world of Atzilut, the world of formation, of emanation. Then there's the world of Bria, of creation, and the world of formation, the world of Yetzirah, and the world of action, the world of doing, the world of making, the physical, the spiritual counterpart of this physical world is called Olam HaAsiyah. When we talk about Olamot HaElyonim, we're generally talking about Bria and Atzilut, or Atzilut and Adam Kadmon. So in other words, these ideas, the ideas of what's going, that higher spiritual consciousness of the world of Atzilut, the world that is emanated and is very close to, from the word Eitzel, it is close to God, and the world of Adam Kadmon, which is a meta world, is a world of complete God consciousness. These are a hint as to what this coming year holds in store for us. In other words, a higher level of consciousness. Whether we will reach the level of consciousness in the world of Atzilut or Adam Kadmon remains to be seen. And that is these extremely, extremely, extremely lofty levels. And only the greatest saints and sages actually reach those levels, and greatest Kabbalists. But nevertheless, we have an inkling of them, even though we're not fully conscious of them. But we can have an inkling of them as we go through our studies and our understanding and our learning and so on and so forth. We get some kind of glimpse of what the Olamot HaElyonim, the upper worlds, are all about. And that is also the gematria, the numerical value of, again, 778, right? Which is the year 778, excluding the millennium, which is 5778. Okay. So these are some of the ideas that are coming into being. Just to summarize, the most important thing that we can do is, as the suggestion in the first verse is, the suggestion in this verse is, open ourselves up to be aroused from above. Be ready for such a thing. Be willing to be aroused from above. Be willing to be inspired, to feel a certain inspiration. Whether it's on the day of Rosh Hashanah, and the day of the Jewish New Year, or whether it's some other day, or both, or every day. That's what we should seek out and try and achieve. A certain sense of inspiration, to be inspired from above. But that's not sufficient only to wait for the inspiration to come from above. We ourselves have to go and seek it out. We have to do things. We have to create conditions that the fruits will start to blossom even before the leaves, right? We have to create those conditions. How? Through thought, speech, and action of the right sort. Through making sure that our thought, our speech, our deeds are positive ones, are deeds that manifest godliness in the world, manifest kindness, manifest love in the world, manifest truth in the world. And then we will find that this coming year is in fact a very fruitful year, a year which is going to be amazingly, God willing, it's going to be amazingly fruitful and amazingly positive. Well, I hope that gives you some hope for the coming year. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take some questions now. Let's see over here. Do I think it'll be a good year to work on our relations with the Almighty, as it is said that He can be found? Yes, absolutely. That is exactly what the intention is. That is exactly the intention of this year. It's a time now to start work. We don't have to wait till the new year. Start working now, because when the new year comes, how we absorb the new light that's coming down depends on how we prepare the vessel. Did we prepare the vessel? If we didn't prepare the vessel properly, then it's very likely that the vessel's not going to contain very much. It's not going to be able to contain, and even what it does contain, we don't want the vessel to contaminate it. We have to purify the vessel now. That's what the month of preparation that precedes the new year is all about. Wendy's asking, the tree of life is often depicted as an apple tree. Could there be any correlation with the uniqueness of the apple tree that you just referred to? The fruit's first tree. Yeah, if yes, I could talk about. Could I talk about that for a moment? Yeah. Now, let me just say that, interestingly enough, I did some research on this once about why the tree of life was, people thought it was the tree of good and evil, actually thought was an apple tree. It's an interesting thing. It seems that the reason for it is as follows: that there were two trees in the Garden of Eden, and according to the Zohar, they were really the same tree, but two sides of it, the front of it and the back of it, or whatever. But there was the tree of life and the tree of good and evil, right? The tree of knowledge of good and evil. So the tree of knowledge of good and evil, in Latin, the translation of evil, I forget what the translation of good is, but the translation of evil is malum, M-A-L-U-M, right? M-A-L-U-M, malum. Now, the meaning of that, the meaning of malum, evil, also means, with a slightly different pronunciation, apparently means apple, right? So when the Bible was actually translated into Latin, some people thought it was talking about an apple tree, but it wasn't. It's just talking about the tree of good and evil. It wasn't a tree in the sense that we understand it. Anything that existed in the Garden of Eden existed in a spiritual dimension. The Garden of Eden is a spiritual dimension, not a physical dimension. So even though Adam and Eve were in they were in the garden, right? Adam and Eve were in the garden, but we're talking there about the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil being spiritual dimensions. They weren't physical trees per se, and eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil was a spiritual act. It wasn't actually a physical act of taking a bite out of a fruit or whatever it is. Nevertheless, we do understand that even a fruit tree has a message to us. In our particular case, the apple tree has a message to us, and that is, as I mentioned before, start without any promises of protection, without any promises of that the leaves are going to come and they're going to protect the fruit. Start producing, right? Start producing the fruit. Start acting, start thinking, start speaking, whatever it is that you're doing, whichever appeals to you, but do the acts of kindness, do the acts of sincerity, of repairing one's relationship to the Almighty. These are things that are important. Fruits first, as Wendy put it, and that's what I think is the most important thing. Act first, and philosophize later. Yeah, if we always philosophize before we act, then generally we end up just philosophizing and never actually come to action. Let's see, there are a couple more questions. I hope that answers that. What are the best ways to overcome the fear of loss and transform the fear into God's intervention? That is really a subject. That is a subject for an entire class, Terry. If you don't mind, send me an email with the question again: the best ways to overcome fear of loss and transform the fear into divine intervention. And I will address that in an entire class. It's something that, as the expression goes, I don't want to deal with standing on one foot, because it's already getting a bit late, and we need to do justice to such a subject. It's a very important subject, and one that we should spend some time talking about, if that's okay with you. Yes, that is true. Yeah, evil is very enticing. It is, but as we all know, it eventually comes back to bite you in the rear end, right? Even though it seems enticing and delicious in the beginning, it may not turn out that way in the end, as we all know, probably from our own experience. Okay. That's your husband brought in the first apple from your apple trees tonight. Wow, that is really cool. Yeah, acts of kindness repair relationships with family, with friends, and with the Almighty. Many rabbis, argued with God. They didn't just accept obviously in a respectful kind of a way, but there were arguments, and they weren't just willing to forego situations that seem to them to be negative. So you can argue with God respectfully, and that's part of prayer. One of the words, one of the translation of the word prayer in Hebrew, the word to pray in Hebrew is lehitpalel, which is very closely related to the word pilpul. Pilpul means an analysis and an argument, a discussion. You can discuss things with God. You don't have to just, bend your head, and you can discuss it. Why things like this? What's the purpose? Make the purpose clear to me. Help me understand, and so on and so forth. Yeah, tiny trees. Yeah. Okay, so